Good evening. I trust you had a fruitful day. I do not say happy, though I hope, of course, it has been a very happy day. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sambha sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sambha sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the Buddha, the blessed, noble, and fully self-awakened one. I don't think it's COVID. So, okay, this evening, I want to do an overview of two things. First of all, the discourse that we covered last night, and the earlier discourse about the self. And I just want to go through this schema. Hopefully, we can see how it all fits together, and we'll take it from there. So the Buddha says that we suffer from a delusion, right? That's one of the basic. That's the platform upon which everything goes wrong. Some form of delusion, and this delusion manifests as a self, the sense of self, the view of self, right? Now, when we think about the view of self, we're talking about how I understand myself to be, or how people understand themselves to be. So the first one is that this is what we did when we did right at the beginning of this series. There are people who say that I exist and I will continue to exist. So that's an eternalist idea, that this sense of self will continue forever. And of course, there are those materialists who say that's a lot of rubbish. When you die, that's the end of it. So that's the first two. Now, the next three are to do with this sense of self-awareness. So the first one is that the self-awareness and what I'm observing is all me, right? So it's another eternalist view, you might say. Everything that I'm aware of and I'm aware of myself is all me. Then there's a separation. Some people feel that, well, I am the self-awareness, but I'm not what I'm aware of. The self-awareness is my spirit, right? So that's still an eternalist thing, but at least it doesn't include everything that we experience. It's more spiritual. And some say the observed is real, but not the self-awareness. So that's, of course, a materialist view where the sense of self is an emergent property from the physical brain. And that, of course, is an annihilationist point of view. And the final one is everything I experience myself to be, etc., is eternal, right? It's always there. I can always go back to it. I can always be it. So that's a really full-blown eternalist view. In other words, when I die, I will be exactly like me. And as you know, some people believe that they will be come back to the earth and with a renewed body. Okay, so there are all these views of a self. And this comes under, first of all, the delusion, but it also comes under this trilogy of wrong view, attachment, and conceit. It manifests as conceit, right? Which is some sort of relationship always that we have with the other. So I'm better than, I'm not as good as, and I'm equal to. Right. Now, remember that equal to is a bit of a, is also a conceit. It sounds humble. Oh, I'm equal to you. But remember, you've created a little island of a group which compares itself to another group, which is, of course, superior, and another group which is inferior. Okay, so that's the basis of the self. Now, this self now begins to perceive. And here, when it perceives, this original delusion distorts the perception. In other words, it's not seeing things as they are. It's always seeing things through this level of delusion. So first of all, that we tend to see permanent, what at least semi-permanence, what is actually fundamentally impermanent. So we tend to presume that things will stay the same. It's just one of those things. So that's when things change, especially radically, we're always in a state of shock. So that's because beneath it all, we presume that, you know, life will just carry on much the same. We mistake the painful for the pleasant. So that's to do with indulgence. So when we're indulging ourselves, it's great, but we don't see the consequences of it. So we mistake it for something that's really pleasing when in fact it's got a sting in the tail. And the not self as self. So this is the idea that something in me is completely isolated. It's a whole, entire unto itself. But when, of course, I look into it, I find it's all made up of bits and pieces. And the final one is to mistake what is ultimately ugly or foul or not pleasant for what is pleasant. And again, we're talking about relationship to human beings, etc. So as we say, beauty is only skin deep. So those are the distortions of perception that arise with the self, right? They're the perversions, as they're called, perversions, vipallasa. Now, running alongside this are our feelings, our emotions, our moods, right? And I'm not really talking here about the physical ones, just the heart ones. Now, the heart isn't logical. When we say in the evening, when we say, may all beings be free of physical pain, we know all beings are not going to be free of physical pain, but it's coming from the heart. The heart isn't rational. It's just an emotional opening, as it were. But of course, it can distort reason. It can distort. It can either support reason or distort it. So as you can see with these fanatics, this grasping, this tanha, this holding on to their anger and their hatred can cause tremendous suffering for others. On the other hand, it can be very supportive. So anger, say about the climate crisis, can be turned into very positive action. It moves you. It's a force that can push you there. But of course, it's got to move from being anger to being active compassion. And that's the problem. So it's the distinction between being reactive and responsive, right? So when we find ourselves just reacting, we know we're coming from a delusive position. The heart, that is, I'm talking about. And when we're actually responding out of love, compassion, joy, then that's coming out more out of wisdom. Even though we may be coming from a wiser position, remember there's underlying all this delusion of self. So that's the second one. That's the grasping. Yeah. Now these perceptions that we talked about, when we perceive something, they grow into concepts, and that's what we were discussing yesterday mainly. And the first examples that he gave is, of course, the four great elements, which is how we experience the body. So the body becomes an identity, the body as me. Okay, there's your first concept, right? So you have the body and it's me. And then you have this business of I am in the body, right? There's me separate from the body. So the first part that we talked about, the self, is about how the self experiences itself. This is how it experiences other things, the things that it experiences. And the next one is, I am not the body, right? There's a separation. And the final one is, I own the body. So I am the body, I am in the body, I'm not the body, and I own the body. So there's your concepts. And this translates into everything that, that we experience. So you might not be with objects, you own them. You say, well, this is mine. And now that creates a relationship of possession, so that when you lose it, there's suffering. When we tell ourselves that we can only actually use an object, the loss of it is nice. It doesn't hit the heart. And if somebody steals it, well, you offer it to them, even if it's your mobile. That's very difficult, I know. Now, this conceiving, of course, moves with the emotional life, moves into what's called sanya sankara, sanya papancha. So that means that both when these feelings, when these emotional mental states join, support a concept, an idea, then of course the mind begins to create. And if it's based on something unwholesome, then it won't be very good. But if it's based on something wholesome, at least something wholesome will come of it. So normally speaking, this is a bit of a downer that they have this proliferation, because it's presumed that it's always coming from the self, and that's true. But the self, the effect of the selfishness of the self can be attenuated by the practice of renunciation, the hatred by the practice of love, and the cruelty by the practice of compassion, and so on and so forth. All these vices that we find in ourselves, these horrible things that we find in ourselves, they can be changed towards their opposite by us, by being aware of what we're doing and putting the right intention into our hearts. So although it's proliferation, the proliferation can be a benefit. Hence, we do things that are good, we create things that are good for ourselves, for others, etc. So there we have that process, right? From this delusive moment where we believe ourselves to be this psychophysical organism in various ways, we perceive things in a slightly distorted way and have a reaction to them in the heart in a slightly distorted way. These two conjoin together to create, the perceptions then move into a more conceptual idea with ideas, philosophies, etc. And when that joins with the heart, you have this proliferation. And that's what happens when you're sitting here. See, if you're sitting in your meditation and off you go, and you're finally found the answer to, climate crisis, and this is what you're going to do, and you're going to save the world, then this is the proliferation, right? If you're studying the Dharma and you're actually thinking seriously about it, then of course the proliferation is a benefit to yourself and others with a bit of luck. So that's a sort of, hopefully you've got the flow of that, right? From delusion, the continual selfing, and included in this, by the way, are dependent origination, the 5 khandhas, the 6 sense bases, and what comes out of those. You can see how enormously complicated this whole thing is. So from the sense of self, we have mistaken perceptions that move into mistaken concepts. And on the other side, on the heart side, we have these reactions which are based on the self, and therefore tend to be, if they're based on the self, they tend to be unwholesome, holding on to things, acquisitiveness, hatred, etc., etc. And when these two come together, then that's how we behave. So being aware of this, we pull back on it. We try not to. We question our understandings, and we don't allow the heart to push us forward so much with its negativities. Slowly, everything begins to purify. We become more clear about things. And that's the process of awakening to the way things really are. So I hope that gives you some idea of the complexity of the Buddha's teachings. Now, you can ask yourself, of course, is this absolutely necessary? I mean, do we have to know this stuff? And the answer is no. No, for some people, it's necessary. They're very intellectual. They like to go into things. And for people who are not so intellectual, at least it gives them that confidence that comes from knowing that this system has really been understood extremely deeply by the Buddha. And I've not done it any justice whatsoever. Remember, Bhikkhu Bodhi's written a book on this topic. So then the end of the discourse now is about the person who finally sheds all this completely. So the first one is the Arahat, the one who's completely free of taints. His old taints, the oozings, have been destroyed, who has lived the holy life, done what had to be done, laid down the burden. Oh, how wonderful. Laid down the burden, reached the true goal, destroyed the fetters of being, the chains of becoming, and is completely liberated through final knowledge, and directly he knows the earth is earth, the body is the body, etc., etc. And having directly known this, he does not conceive, he does not wrongly conceive, he has no wrong conception, shall we say. Why? Because he's fully understood it. Okay. And the same is said again, that he's come to this position because he is free of lust through the destruction of lust, right? So in other words, there's no, actually, the translation here is of raga, which is, lust, of course, has that meaning of sexuality about it. But this is more like passion, indulgent passion, passionate indulgence. But it stands really for any craving, even the slightest craving. So he's destroyed it because the actual core problem of craving has been completely destroyed. And that's the same with hatred, because he is free from the hate through the destruction of hatred. Remember this, again, although it's translated as hatred, aversion, I always think, is a better word, because it also includes the idea of fear. Because at the basis of everything is fear, right? It's the fear of losing one's life, the fear that comes from knowing the instability of the world, that we have this idea of acquiring things to make ourselves feel safe and pushing away, getting rid of anything which is taking away that sense of safety. And of course, finally, he's free of that delusion, that fundamental delusion as to the self through the destruction of delusion itself. So that's the last thing to go, that delusion, that ignorance, that not knowing. So that's why a person is fully liberated. Now, the Tathagata, which is the way the Buddha talked about himself, pointing to himself, he is also accomplished and fully enlightened, directly knows all this stuff, and he does not mistake all these conceptions, because the Tathagata has fully understood it to the end. In other words, as deep as you can go concerning our condition, the Buddha has understood that. And he's done the same because he has understood the indulgence is the root of suffering. That's the tanha, the desire. And that with this, as a condition, there is birth, and that whatever has come to be, to become, there is aging and death. Therefore, through the complete destruction, fading away, cessation, giving up, and relinquishing of those cravings, the Tathagata has awakened to the supreme full enlightenment, I say. So he's really stressing the fact that all that craving is completely gone in him. Not even traces of it are left in the mind, heart mind. And again, therefore, through the complete destruction, fading away, cessation, giving up, and relinquishment of all those cravings, the Tathagata has awakened to the supreme full enlightenment, I say. So basically, he's the master. He's the one who knows. And of course, this is said. He's saying this to give them confidence, because the ending of this discourse is quite rare. This is what the Blessed One said, but the bhikkhus did not delight in the Blessed One's words. Now there we are. They weren't happy at all with what he said. And it is said that he then later gave a discourse where he expresses that, you know, this stuff he knows for himself is of direct experience, and this gives these people, these listeners, enough confidence to become fully liberated. But let's just see why they weren't happy. Let's see what the commentaries say. Lost my page here. Here we are. No, that's not it. Oh, 31. There's so many notes, unbelievable. Okay. They did not delight in the Buddha's words, apparently because the discourse probed too deeply into the tender regions of their own conceit, and perhaps their residual Brahminic views. The discourse doesn't say they're Brahmins, but it says that here. At a later time, the commentary says, when their pride had been humbled, the Buddha expounded on these same listeners in a discourse, and through which they all attained arahatship. They all became fully liberated. So there we are. So sometimes the Buddha said things which weren't pleasing to hear, and they would find it difficult to express their joy. I suppose they just sat there looking rather serious and glum. So I hope this evening has pulled a lot of things together for you, and that you will, of course, understand that this sort of depth of understanding is really for investigation. If you're interested in it, it's for lifting that confidence in the Buddha's teachings. But at base, the practice is extraordinarily simple. You know, people make the first path and fruit knowing hardly anything about Buddhism. I met a man, he's died now. He was a monk, a Christian monk, a Carthusian, and he had gone to Burma on the hearsay of somebody he'd met who said that the meditation was rather interesting. And while he was there at the Mahasi Center, he went through all these Vipassana jnanas. He told me, and the way he explained them, he'd obviously done it, and they told him he'd done it. And then he went back home. When he came back to the monastery the next year to practice, and by the way, he knew virtually, he only knew the surface understandings of Buddhism. When he went back to practice, the monks at the Mahasi Center were sort of a bit mystified as to why he hadn't become a Buddhist. He was still a very committed Christian. So it just shows you that Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, they're the next level of understanding coming from certain cultural traditions, etc. But anybody can come to the Vipassana and just observe, just feel, just see, and keep looking at this reactive reaction within us to see impermanence and to create that distance and know that everything's happening not directly under our control. These are the insights that lead to liberation. So having said that, I hope those of you who would have feared that you'd have to go into and get an MA or a PhD in this stuff before you became liberated are relieved. And I can only hope that by your practice, you will in fact be relieved of all your suffering sooner rather than later. So we can do a bit of practice. Buddha